When Ethiopia announced in 2006 that it would reforest thousands of hectares of forest without planting a single tree, the world laughed. "A green utopia for the hopeless," sneered the Washington Post. "They'd be better off moving to the Sahara," said a Brussels official. A German environmentalist wrote an article titled, "Why Ethiopia is Like Earth's Mars," and the whole world thought it knew the truth. This is one of the world's poorest countries, where the only sound is the roar of death, where more than 1,000 people die every day from hunger and related diseases, and where the desert is devouring the last habitable areas like an invasion of tanks. So what? They want to plant trees from the air? Others sneered. Do they talk to tree trunks? Maybe they're friends with the sand too? CNN aired reports on crazy African plans to bring rocks back to life. The BBC produced documentaries about how poverty leads to hallucinations. "We'll plant a forest by talking to dead tree trunks," these people would say. It seemed as if in despair they had lost their last shred of sanity. Yet, 10 years later, that same world was in a state of silent disbelief. Where NASA satellites had seen nothing but a brown death wound, a veritable forest had grown. Green, living, breathing, a forest unplanted. This is not a story of survival, but of rebirth. Long ago, Ethiopia was a paradise on Earth. Not metaphorically, but literally. The ancients called it the Garden of Eden, and they had good reason. Imagine, 2/3 of the country, an area larger than France, was covered in forests thicker than the Amazon rainforest. Roman legionaries wrote home of mountains green that stretched to the clouds. Travelers spoke of forests so thick that the midday sun couldn't reach the ground. Lions roar in forests 3,000 meters above sea level. In places today, only rock and bones remain. Herds of elephants slash their way through giant baobab trees thousands of years old. Honey-scented waterfalls cascaded from heights higher than skyscrapers, their roar heard for tens of kilometers. Leopards hunted in the branches of trees older than Roman aqueducts. Women knew no drought. Water flowed year-round from every crevice. Children swam in endless streams and caught fish with their hands in crystal-clear pools. Old men sat in the shade of trees older than the pyramids and told stories, accompanied by a symphony of 1,000 bird songs. Bees built hives the size of houses, but little by little paradise began to die at the hands of the people themselves. The catastrophe came like an avalanche in slow motion, slow but inexorable. First, they cut down trees along roads because they were easier to transport. Then they moved to the foothills. Then to the sacred groves that protected their ancestors like their eyes, where they buried their chiefs and prayed to the souls of the dead. Every morning, the mountains awoke to the howling of chainsaws. Thousands of people went out with axes, as if waging war with nature itself. The 500-year-old patriarch trees fell within hours. The ground shook as if in an earthquake. Trucks laden with huge logs formed endless funeral processions to the cities, where the wood was turned into furniture for the wealthy. In just one generation, the forests that had witnessed the time of the Queen of Sheba were gone. By the mid-20th century, Ethiopia had lost half its greenery. By 1982, only 3% of the country's forest area remained. That's less than even the Sahara Desert. Without trees, the land became a sieve. Rain didn't seep into the soil, but flowed in streams, washing the last remnants of fertile soil to the sea. Rivers, which had flowed since the time of the dinosaurs, dried up into stony scars in just 10 years. The winds whipped up clouds of dust that could be seen from space. Ethiopia became a terrible brown gash on the green map of Africa. Temperatures rose by 3 degrees. The rainy season shrunk from 6 months to just 1. Lakes that had existed for millions of years began to dry up, leaving only salty wastelands. Animals fled or died painfully. Birds never returned in the spring. The great silence came. A terrible dead silence where the orchestra of life had once played. The world remembered Ethiopia through the images of horror burned into the world's eyes, the 1980s. Children like skeletons with eyes the size of saucers that saw nothing but emptiness. Mothers who became walking shadows, cradling their babies like tiny birds in their arms. Lines kilometer long for grain under the scorching sun of the dead earth. Mothers carried their dead children hundreds of kilometers, only to bury them in the very earth that had given them life. Entire villages turned into ghost towns within weeks. People simply left, never to return. Farmers found their cows mummified near dry wells, their bones turning white in the sun as a warning sign. At the height of the famine, the country claimed the lives of thousands of people a day. In just 3 years, the horrific hunger wiped out a population the size of Munich. International journalists traveled to film the African hell and then returned to their comfortable studios to show the world the horror. But this catastrophe was no accident. It was a judgment rendered by the planet itself after decades of devastation. Frenzied deforestation had turned the land into a desert-like wasteland. Ethiopia lost 1 billion tons of fertile soil annually, more than the weight of the entire Netherlands. The winds scattered it across the world, from the Amazon rainforest to the icy rivers of Antarctica, like the ash of a dead green paradise. The fragile balance of the ecosystem collapsed like a house of cards. The rain that had irrigated the land for thousands of years ceased to fall. Streams turned into cracks in the ground that widened like wounds. Crops withered before they could ripen. Farmers whose families had lived on this land for centuries now harvested only 1 month's worth of grain instead of an entire year's. The desert spread with the speed of a blitzkrieg, 50,000 hectares a year. In the highlands, where treetops once swayed in the wind, only sandstorms howled. Farmers abandoned their ancestral fields, leaving behind only the graves of their ancestors. Cattle died of thirst, their heads in the cracked clay soil of former ponds. The government began to evacuate entire provinces. The roads were clogged with caravans of refugees, virtually living corpses, wandering about with bundles on their shoulders. International experts delivered a stark verdict. By the year 2000, Ethiopia would be an uninhabitable desert. It seemed as if the country had forever forgotten the meaning of life. The first rescue attempts on a colossal scale failed. Billions of dollars in international aid evaporated into thin air. Kind Europeans brought seedlings from their greenhouses, but they blackened and died within a week under the African sun. They built dams of the finest concrete, but the first rains washed them away. They dug wells with German precision, but they dried up within a month. Armies of experts from the world's most prestigious universities arrived in white jeeps, examined everything, and rendered a clear verdict: the country was dead forever. A Heidelberg professor even wrote a thesis titled, "Why Ethiopia is Like Mars on Earth," and won a major scientific award for it. When the Ethiopian authorities announced their astonishing plan to reforest without planting a single tree in 2006, the world reacted as if they had claimed to fly to the moon in a hot air balloon. "A green utopia for desperate minds," wrote the Washington Post. The Guardian agreed. "An African fantasy on the verge of madness." "What, they want to sing lullabies to the sand?" joked a French scientist at a Sorbonne conference. CNN broadcast reports on crazy plans to reanimate stones with prayer. The BBC produced documentaries about how extreme poverty leads to hallucinations. Scientists in tweed suits sneered. "They think they can talk to dead tree trunks." The world believed in one simple truth: nothing grows in the desert. End of talk. But fortunately, the earth was smarter than humans. In 1983, in the remote, scorched desert of Niger, a discovery was made that changed everything. Tony Ronaldo, an Australian agronomist, was a young idealist determined to prevent the desert from devouring the vast Sahel, the arid region between the Sahara Desert and the African savanna. He came to Africa as a knight on a white horse, prepared to battle the harsh desert almost single-handedly. For years, he planted trees with the determination of a fanatic. His organization spent millions on seedlings, fertilizers, and irrigation systems. Each year, they planted 6,000 trees. Each year, 5,500 died. The locals called him the crazy white farmer. Children laughed as they watched him water the withered sticks in the 55-degree heat and talked to them as if they were children. The desert was harsh and sarcastic. Fierce winds ripped seedlings from the ground like matchsticks. The sun scorched them in a day. Sand buried them overnight. Then one day, while changing a flat tire on a dusty road in the middle of a drought, when even scorpions hid in their deep burrows, Tony noticed something odd. Growing by the side of the road was what he took to be weeds. Out of professional curiosity, he leaned closer and was astonished. It was the trunk of an ancient tree, alive, with roots desperately trying to grow. Dozens of tiny green shoots sprouted from the seemingly dead trunk, like the fingers of a drowning man grasping a light, like a cry for help echoing through time. At that moment, something clicked in Tony's mind. He realized he'd been solving the wrong problem for years. This wasn't about planting new trees. This was about finding a way to bring old trees back to life. Beneath layers of sand and dust, the root systems of trees felled decades ago were still alive. They reached more than 30 meters below the water table, where drought couldn't harm them. They waited. They remembered what it's like to be a forest. They were asleep but not completely dead. And so FMNR, Farmer-Managed Natural Regeneration, was born. The secret was ridiculously simple. If a tree trunk produces dozens of weak shoots, only 3 to 4 of the strongest ones remain. All the energy of the old root system goes to those few shoots instead of being wasted on many weak ones. The result? One shoot grows a few centimeters a month. In 1 year, a small, human-sized tree appears. In 3 years, a full canopy. Since 1983, a similar experiment with 10 farmers in Niger has slowly gained momentum. By the early 2000s, the method had spread to hundreds of thousands of hectares, a remarkable result for the arid Sahel. Tree density rose from 4 to 20 per hectare. Millet and sorghum yields increased by nearly 20%. Shrubs, young trees, and fodder appeared. Local people were satisfied. Children no longer went hungry during the dry season, and women had a lot of money to spend. They had less time collecting firewood. But that was just a drop in the bucket for the Sahel. By 2005, the U.S. Geological Survey recorded vegetation recovery on some 3 million hectares, an impressive figure, but it's only a tiny fraction of the Sahel's 200 million hectares. Most experts considered Niger's success local and non-transferable. Tony Ronaldo and his team were aware of the harsh reality. Niger's relatively mild climate, with an average of 500 millimeters of rainfall per year, is very different from that of drought-stricken Ethiopia, which went 8 to 10 months without rain. In Niger, there was at least an occasional drizzle to keep the soil moist. In Ethiopia, the ground was as hard as asphalt, and temperatures often reached 50 degrees Celsius. Humidity dropped to less than 10%. Hurricane-force winds dried up any growth in a matter of hours. Despite everything, Ethiopia decided to test Niger's crazy idea on a national scale. The world laughed. If Niger has reclaimed only a tiny fraction of its desert in 23 years, wrote the journal Nature, what do they hope to achieve in the hell that is Ethiopia? Climate scientists from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology explained, the climate difference is enormous. It's like comparing a greenhouse to the surface of Mars. A French ecologist quipped at a conference in Paris. In Niger, at least there's a rainy season. In Ethiopia, there's only a dying season. Rumors of the mad white farmer from Niger and his magic tricks soon reached the Humbo region, a region ravaged by famine for 30 years. 7 local communities decided to try Tony Ronaldo's idea. They had no choice but to starve or experience a miracle. Humbo was nicknamed the lunar landscape. The hills were bare, like the skull of a newborn. Not a tree was in sight, only rock and dust as far as the eye could see. The ground had turned to concrete, able to be cut with an axe. The children knew no shade other than that of their flimsy huts. The women walked 15 kilometers a day to fetch water, returning under a starry sky when the heat of the day subsided. People accept physical rehabilitation out of desperation, like prisoners awaiting execution. They fenced off the drier spots with barbed wire. They stopped cutting what looked like weeds. They began to prune the weak shoots with sharp knives, nurturing the strong ones like their own children. They protected the young shoots from the goats and cattle that were eating every green leaf, and they waited and prayed to all their gods. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. Silence fell over the land. Many began to doubt. Maybe the experts were right after all. Had they really gone mad? But the elders insisted. Patience was necessary. "The land has been asleep for 30 years, they said. "Give it time to wake up." Then, after 3 months, a miracle happened. The first results appeared like a gift from heaven. Tiny green dots on the brown canvas of death, like stars in the night sky. Children ran from bush to bush, counting each new shoot. Women wept with joy and kissed the first leaves. 6 months later, the bushes were waist high. A year later, the young trees rustled in the wind. 3 years later, the people no longer recognized their land, where once there was only desert. The young trees were now green and vigorous. NASA recorded a true phenomenon from space. A green expanse expanding in the middle of the desert at a rate of 10 hectares per month. Scientists repeatedly checked the data. They'd never seen anything like it. Satellites don't lie. By 2020, the Humbo forest had sequestered nearly 3 million tons of carbon dioxide. That's more than a small European country emits in an entire year. The project was the first in Africa to sell emission certificates on the international market. The communities earned $500,000, more money than they'd ever seen in their entire history. Crop yields soared. Farmers who once harvested 3 bags of grain from a single field now harvested 15 bags from the same area. New sources of income emerged. Wild honey from bees that had returned from nowhere, medicinal herbs, building materials, and animal fodder. People who had struggled all their lives to survive began to plan a future for their children for the first time. But the most amazing thing happened to the water. There had once been 13 springs in the mountains surrounding Humbo. All were dry by the 1980s. Elders remembered them as places where children had played and women talked, where girls learned to braid their hair and boys caught frogs. But for 30 years, they had been just dusty, thorn-covered pits. Geologists concluded the water was gone forever, the aquifers irretrievably depleted. But the trees knew better than the geologists. As FMNR worked its magic, something incredible happened underground. The soil beneath the new treetops turned into a sponge. The rain no longer trickled in streams, washing the last vestiges of fertility into the distant seas. It began to seep in, penetrating deeper and deeper, quietly revitalizing the dormant aquifers. Then the springs returned. At first, it was just tiny drops after rain, disappearing within an hour. Then it flowed for longer. Then it flowed for a whole day. Then for a week. Then it never stopped, even during the harshest dry season. The water was cool and clear, like tears of joy from the earth itself. Today, 6 of the 13 springs gush year-round with the power of geysers. Their sound can be heard from a kilometer away, the true song of a reborn land. Children who have never seen running water now splash in streams and learn to swim in pools. Women who once had to walk half a day on rocky paths to fetch water now tip their buckets 5 minutes from their homes. No one has dug wells. No one has installed pumps. No one has laid pipes. Simply put, people gave nature a chance to remember how to live. 10 years later, the BBC returned to Humbo to film a sequel. The crew got lost on the first day. The cameraman looked around in bewilderment. The place he remembered as a lunar crater had become a veritable jungle. The GPS showed the correct coordinates, but their eyes refused to believe what they were seeing. Whereas the view had once stretched endlessly over the bare earth, the dense greenery now made it impossible to see more than 10 meters ahead. Instead of the wind whistling through the rocks, there was a symphony of birdsong and the rustle of leaves. Children born after the project began don't believe their parents' stories about the desert. They know only the shadows of trees, the chirping of birds, and the gurgling of streams. When they are shown old photographs, they think they are from Mars. How do people live in such hell? They wonder in amazement. Experts are quietly rewriting textbooks. Universities that once ridiculed FMNR as shamanistic are establishing departments dedicated to it. Professors from Harvard and Oxford are lining up to study these primitive methods of African farmers. Humbo's story has spread across Africa like a virus of hope. FMNR has spread faster than an epidemic. In West Africa, 15 million hectares of land have already been rehabilitated. In Mali, 70% of families no longer know what hunger is. In Kenya, incomes have risen by 40%. In Senegal, children are seeing antelopes for the first time in years. The cost of this method is extremely low. $40 per hectare compared to $18,000 for conventional reforestation. The survival rate is 90% compared to 20% for imported seedlings. Chinese scientists are coming to study African magic and adapting it to the Gansu deserts. Indians are testing this unique approach in Rajasthan. Mexicans in Sonora. Brazilians are restoring the Cerrado. Australian Aboriginal communities are regenerating their forest lands after fires using their ancestral knowledge. The World Economic Forum launched the Trillion Trees program. The United Nations declared 2021-2030 the decade for ecosystem restoration. Forestry Remote Sensing Reforestation, FMNR, is now a key technology for saving our planet. Tony Rinaudo was awarded the Alternative Nobel Prize. In Davos, people listened to him like a prophet. His book, The Forest Underground, has been translated into 20 languages. The man once called the Mad Farmer is now known as the man who whispers to the trees. NASA has confirmed this sentiment. Despite the devastating deforestation of the Amazon, green spaces on Earth are growing, and Africa is leading this miracle. In 15 years, Ethiopia has reforested an area of forest larger than Belgium. A country that was losing 1 million hectares annually is now restoring 500,000 hectares annually. This is the fastest ecosystem restoration in history. The region's climate is changing before our eyes. The rainy season has temperatures have dropped by 2 degrees. Humidity has increased by 1/3. Birds not seen for 50 years have returned. Eagles, storks, and sunbirds. Fatima from Humbo now exports honey to Europe, 2 tons a year from plants her grandmother thought extinct. Bees believed in the return of the forest before humans, she says with a smile, showing off the pots of golden honey. Leading delegations from 40 countries around the world, Damisu shows them the tree trunk where it all began. The remains of a gnarled tree cut down by her grandfather in the 1960s has now grown into a giant tree with a canopy that can accommodate 100 people. My grandfather killed the tree, so I brought it back to life and my grandson will eat its fruit, Abebe tells each group. Every morning, 89-year-old Abebe sits under the tree he helped grow and weeps with joy. I thought I would die without ever seeing the green hills of my childhood again, but the earth was more patient and wiser than us. Today, as the planet blazes with the fires of climate catastrophe, and experts warn of irreversible processes, Ethiopia's astonishing revival sounds like a hymn of hope. If one of the world's poorest countries can bring life to dead land with its bare hands, what can we all achieve together? The method is now spreading to 27 countries, from Kenya and Mali to India, Australia, and Mexico, from Laos to Argentina. The seeds of an idea sown in the soil of an African village are now growing on every continent. In 30 years, children will be playing in these forests, children who would never have believed a desert existed here. And when they see photos from 2006, they will ask, "Why did you wait so long to start?" Ethiopia didn't plant a single tree, but it inspired hope for the entire planet. It proved a simple truth. Beneath every desert lies a forest, waiting to be helped to rise. And if you ever doubt the power of human faith, remember this story. Remember those who didn't give up when the whole world mocked them. Remember the land that remembered how to live and waited for someone to believe in miracles. Look out your window right now. Perhaps beneath the ground of your home there is a forest waiting for your faith. If poor Ethiopia can revive its land with its bare hands, what's stopping each one of us from saving at least our garden, our street, our land?